All right, so there's something we got to talk about, and that's our education system. Not only is it highly corrupt, it's absolute garbage. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about why is the government so highly involved in our education? What are their interests? What are their intentions? And should we keep the education system that we have? Should we change it, or should we get rid of it altogether? These phases, they're quite a lot, from elementary to postgraduate school. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of loopholes. I'm going to try not to get distracted, but here we go. So you start off, your parents, double income trap. They both have to work. The world's getting expensive, and there's reasons why, but not in this video. So obviously they got to ship their kid out to school, and they trust the government that they're going to educate their children correctly. We'll see later on that that's totally not the case. So you're 6, 7 years old, you're filled with energy, and now you're closed in a room. Artificial lights, you got to sit in a chair for 8 hours a day, 5 times a week. That is a 9 to 5, in other words. So early on, you're getting prepared for a 9 to 5. They want to train people. They want to train the kids to become complacent, tolerable children that work, and later on they'll obviously work. It's just a factory of the type of workers they want. So obviously the kid filled with energy is not going to like being sat down, and the teacher is going to be like, hey, your kid's not paying attention. I think we got to throw some Adderall in there. Throw the Adderall to those kids, and obviously now you got a bunch of kids taking pills just so they can pay attention to the boring class that they're given. And so they can sit there for 8 hours, which is nothing natural at all. We know that a stationary lifestyle is quite unhealthy. But obviously, so now you got pills, you got unhealthy lifestyle. We're on the right track for what the government wants. And now you move on to middle school. Again, they're probably still taking Adderall, at least a few. And more history. History is all basically written by the winner, and so it's all alternated in a way. Again, it doesn't matter. Middle school is another 9 to 5. You gotta be consistent with the education system. If you want a 9 to 5 complacent worker, you gotta train them from a very young age and keep on training them until they're ready. So that's what middle school is. It's just another 9 to 5. And obviously no creative thinking. You don't want your society to be critical thinkers, because they're going to realize that what you're doing to them is not okay. And they're going to find ways to, escape and live their own lives. So no critical thinking done in any of these schools. Not at all. Because, obviously they don't need that. They want non-thinkers, complacent workers. So that's what they go for. ABCD, multiple choice, just remember this, read that, write it, and we'll test you. If you got a good memory, then we're gonna give you good grades. If not, bad grades, all this societal pressure as well, and quite a lot of stuff, AP, AP classes, honor roll classes, compare yourself with your classmates, and you build quite a competitive playing field. And that's exactly what they want. Not only complacent workers, but workers that are, individualist. And that's what America, the United States, created so perfectly. Individualism. Individualism basically means, that's my neighbor, but I don't care about him because he's my competition. And I'm going to bow down to, the higher ups, the corporate, the government. But, my neighbor, he's not in my team. So local community is divided, and it's just easier. If there is no local community, it's easier to control them. So complacent workers, not critical thinking, and individualists. Perfect recipe for a future worker. And there you go. So you're moving on, high school, another 9 to 5. Maybe throw in some, electives, maybe get them interested in other subjects. But not too much. You don't want them to actually, do all that stuff. I mean, think about it. The world, these elites, these higher-ups, these governments, they don't really need critical lawyers. They don't need doctors that could heal people. They already know how to do that, and that would help people out, and that's not what they need. So again, 9 to 5, more societal pressure, pressure them about college. Hey, you got to go to college. If you get bad grades, you're going to go to the military. Again, that's just another thing, the military. But so now you go to college, oh, you should explore this world, go study somewhere else away from your parents. And, people do that, they go in debt and a lot of money, and, that's quite crazy. I'm thankful, I'm debt free, but I know a lot of people that are filled with debt. And it's a great recipe to indebt your students before, or, because once they graduate, they, instead of going out to the real world and getting to make their own decisions, they're like, shoot, man, I'm already in debt. I got to start working at a corporate job so I could pay off my debt. And that's exactly what most people do. I mean, you already got them interested into corporate jobs. No one really wants to have kids, but hey, being a CEO, that sounds amazing, right? So again, mindset, you've already what's it called, you already dug into their brain, that mentality. They're already complacent, they're not critical thinking. And so, again, now you just fabricated perfect workers just once they graduate, and they're in debt too. So they obviously have to join the rat race. There's not much option to them, unless, don't take my advice, but if I was in quite a lot of money, if I was in quite a lot of debt, I would just leave the United States and never come back. And you would never have to pay for it. Yes, you'd probably have to live in the middle of the wilderness in Africa or Asia. But hey, man, you just become a con artist, get away with all that debt. Just one option. I don't know. Maybe if it works for you, check that out. But yeah. All right, so basically the stages that we talked about, that's just the basic rundown of what the government really wants us to do. Like I've just said, there's no knowledge behind this. They don't want smart people. They just want to, create their perfect factory workers, and they do so from an early age, from the 6 to 7 years old, like I said, until you graduate. And when you have an employee mindset, you don't really know how to survive on your own. You become dependent to the government. And when you become dependent to the government, you have to listen and you have to comply. And that's exactly what they want. So by doing that, by entrapping you to the general education system, they basically prepare you to always be their slaves. And they do that very efficiently. And that's what we need to start talking about. We need to start talking about this because we need to realize that the education system is not good. There's terrible intentions behind it. The interest of the government is obviously not the interest of our proper health, of our education, of our knowledge, of our consciousness. And that needs to be changed, We need to start thinking. We need to start being able to have real skills. Like back then, the schools had carpentry, they had mechanical schools, they were technical schools. But technical schools would mean that you had the liberty, you had the skill to go and make money on your own. So that's not good for the government. The government needs you to be dependent on them. And if you have liberty, then they can't control you. And so they took all that stuff away. And they also push propaganda out. That's because your parents aren't at school and they don't know what's really going on. And the parents really think that you're getting a good education, oh, you graduated from a university, wow, you're super smart, you're a genius, I'm proud of you. But it really doesn't mean anything. I remember when I was 2012, in elementary school, we had like voting day. Obviously we couldn't vote, but they had this whole day, voting booths in the elementary school where we voted for Barack Obama or this other white guy. And everybody was like, oh my God, you're part of the democracy, They try to lie, they try to tell you that you are. And then, oh my, you're free to choose the politicians and, we have liberty in this country, all that funny stuff. And so, yeah, you go and vote and you're 10 years old and you're like, what? Why are they trying to get me into politics at 10 years old, Why are they trying to get me into all this college stuff at such a young age? And now, let's not even talk about now, they're pushing LGBT in all these schools. But hey, man, I don't want to get canceled. But just think about it. Why would the government push LGBT so hard in these schools? Indoctrinate these kids at such a young age, brainwash them. But that would just be another video. But yeah, just like I said, obviously the system is terrible. If you were to change it, you would have to change it on your own. The government is not going to let you change it, so that wouldn't really be an option to restructure the education system. Obviously, what I would love would be more technical schools. So when you get to high school, 14, 15 years old, you can make the decision of what type of school you would want to go to. Do you want to go to art school? Do you want to go to mechanical school? Do you want to go like law school? And having high schools that would be able to give you certificates at a young age, so when you graduate 18, you could start working, would be a good idea, because that would mean that people wouldn't have to go in debt in college, and it would just be another option. But the government wouldn't want to give you options. They want to make the decisions for you. And like I said, we can't rely on the government to restructure the education to work efficiently, because if the government makes a system that works efficiently, it would create a society that wouldn't become dependent on the government. And that's, like I said, it's not something that they're interested in, so they're not going to do it. What I would recommend would be, I know it's quite hard, but get your kid out of that school. And I know there's laws and blah, 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 that your kids have to go to school. But if you could start teaching your kid on your own, or start getting them the right mentors, I don't know, find the actual solution, your kid will be prepared for the real world. Get an entrepreneur mindset in brain to your kids. They're going to be creative. They're going to have the eyes to be able to survive in whatever situation that arises in their lives. And they're going to adapt. And that's important. You need your kids to be strong and ready for the real world. And the General Education Board, the education system that the U.S. has, it's not going to give it to them. So you got to do it. You got to be responsible for your kids' education. And I know it's another task that you have to take. And I know maybe as a parent it's hectic. There's a lot of stress. You got a lot to do. But hey, man, it's your kid's future. So take it very seriously. And don't give it to the hands of the government, because, trust me, you're not going to get good results. But it's just some stuff to look at. I know you could dig a lot deeper into all these stages that I mentioned. But hey, I could go hours. Like I said, loopholes, I probably did get a little distracted. But again, man, general education, it's poop, garbage, corrupt. And it's indoctrinating our kids to become complacent employees. And that's not what I want for this real world. I want everybody in society to have an open mind, to be creative, because that will allow us to synergize and create a sustainable world, a sustainable local economy, where we don't rely on the government, where we don't rely on those big corporations to feed us, because we'll be able to do it on our own. And that's what we want in the future. We want a good future. So man, peace.